Alan, welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I know we penciled it a while ago, but I've been anxiously waiting to be able to talk to you in detail. We've had some brief conversations previously, and I was really excited about those as well. And really looking forward to hearing more about your story, your personal recovery, and more details around your book. I think there's so much to be unraveled just in that discussion and some of the challenges I am seeing in society today. And I think you and I share some of those concerns. So I'm sure we'll get into that. But before we get started, I do want to give you an opportunity to share with us a little bit about yourself and who you are.
Sure. Thanks. And thanks for the invite to be on your show. Been looking forward to this for a while now. Yeah, I'm basically a small business owner. I own a marketing firm. I came up through the manufacturing world. I was chief operating officer for actually in two different companies, about close to 20 years of that, and then close to 10 years in sales and marketing. Left the corporate
Mm.
world in 2011, started my own small marketing firm, which I'm doing to this day. And yeah, I wrote a book, The Globalist Plan to Collapse Everything, that came out in October of 2024. And been on a lot of podcasts since then, just trying to spread the word about what I believe are the dangers to modern society of globalism, the kind of globalism that I see being rolled out. And so that's been my mission for about a year now, is to really focus on that
Yes.
aside from my day job.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the key themes that I like to cover on this podcast is talking through stories of adversity because there's so many lessons that not only we draw out from our own resilience, but by listening to other people, I've been able to find some hope for myself at
Sure.
times just by seeing parts of myself in their story. Are you able to talk about, just to ground us in terms of, what experiences that you went through in your life that shaped who you are today and perhaps even put you in a position to identify some of the issues that you're seeing around you?
Sure. One of the most significant events of my entire life happened when I was 16. And just real quick, it was an experience that opened my eyes to the nature of evil in the world and the power of evil, but also ultimately the power of good. So, what happened to me as a 16-year-old? My dad had scheduled a trip to Europe for several weeks that was going to be last several weeks long. We went to Europe, we went to various countries. I saw different relatives on my mother's and my dad's side. I got immersed into a European culture that was so different from the American culture I'd grown up, like the big city environment, the hustle, everybody working hard, not that much focus on family, even though I had a nice family, small family. But I had never seen family interaction like I saw in Europe among my extended family there, who I didn't know until I went, cousins and relatives, things like that. And the joy that I experienced, that I saw that they had in being in each other's company, was, as a 16-year-old, it was earth shaking. It was like an entirely different world. My worldview just got broken. And up until that point, probably like a lot of kids were at that time, or at least the ones I hung out with, we'd spend our weekends drinking, and just not that we were looking for trouble, because we weren't. We were just looking for excitement. We were bored with life. And so that's what we were doing. We were drinking. And I was just on that track of doing that. Some of my friends smoked marijuana once in a while. I did too. No hard drugs, anything like that. But it was just like
Mhm.
looking for escape is the best way I could describe it. Disappointed with life. What's it about? You're 15, 16 years old. You don't know anything yet. You're trying to figure out the world. And so I was heading down that path and of drinking and starting to dabble with marijuana, things like that. And then I go on this trip to Europe and I see this whole another way of being. The people were joyful without any of that. And I was floored and I was drawn into it. And so by the time I got back, and this was several weeks, by the time I got back to the States, I had made a decision and I didn't tell anybody. It wasn't a religious moment or anything like that. It was just an awareness. I don't need drugs or alcohol to have a good life. In fact, this is a better life without it than what I was experiencing with it. And it was a sea change. So I get back. Now I'm jet lagged from the whole flight from Europe, but all I wanted to do was see my friends, hear American music again, hear everybody speaking English. And I was just so
Yeah.
glad to be back, even though I had a good time there. And so I'm going to different friends' houses. The first friend's house I went to, a couple of my other buddies were there. And the first thing they said is, "Hey, man, when do you want to go get high?" And I wasn't being self-righteous or anything. I just stating the fact. I'm like, I don't ever want to see that shit again, man. We're ruining our lives. And
Mm.
and I meant every word of it. And they were like, "What?" Because a lot of times I was a ringleader that sort of got us going in that direction, and they just couldn't believe it. And so I was going around to different people's homes, all my friends. I just wanted to see everybody. One of my friends had a car, and we were just going around seeing all kinds of people from, I would say, I don't know, was it from 10 in the morning until the evening time? I'm just going all over the place, seeing everybody again. And somewhere along that path of going from place to place, unbeknownst to me, somebody gave me an extremely heavy dose of what I later learned was mescaline, which is like an
Mm.
LSD hallucinogenic drug. And the crazy thing about it was I didn't know I was drugged, and I'm starting to experience these hallucinations without having any clue that anything happened to me. And the way it began was this was around dinner time. I went back home, ate dinner with my parents, or was getting ready to eat dinner. I don't remember. But I remember after I got home, I said, "Hey, Dad, can I use the phone in your bedroom?" Because my parents had a phone in their bedroom back then to call my friends. And he said, "Yeah, go ahead." And it's getting dark. And in the room was actually dark because there were curtains. So it's evening in the summer, it's getting dark. And as I step into the room, I see this wall, like a black sky, but like a wall with stars on it in front of me. And as I step into it, the stars just swirl. If you would spin a wheel
Yeah.
and everything swirled, I didn't know what was going on. I scream out, "Dad!" And he comes running into the room. I told him what happened. And he's like, "All right, what did you take?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" He said, "What did you take?" "I didn't take anything." And we're getting into this big argument. I'm getting more and more aggravated. And he goes, "You took something and you're not going anywhere tonight. You're staying in this room. I'm going to keep my eye on you overnight. And in the morning, we're going to the hospital." And so that's what I did. I slept in my parents' bed and I'm just by myself at this point because it's not late enough for my dad to go to sleep or anything. So I'm just alone. I remember I turn on my right side on my shoulder and I'm looking, so I'm like facing the end table here. And there's a carved Kleenex box with a carving all around it, like the
Yep.
wooden ones that you drop a Kleenex box
Yes.
into. And the carvings on that box twist into this demon face. And then boom, and then back to the carving. And I'm like, so I'm seeing this kind of stuff. It's freaking me out. I don't know what's going on. And then all through that night, on and off, I'm having different kinds of hallucinations. I remember somewhere in the middle of the night, I I honestly thought the Beatles were across the street, set up and playing in the driveway next door because it sounded like their style of music, but it wasn't their
Mm.
music. It was their, I know the Paul McCartney bass line. I know the type of harmonies. I'm a musician myself. And so it was like new music from the Beatles and it sounded really good. And I'm like, what is going on? Of course, they weren't there. It was all in my head. And the next morning, we go into the city. My dad takes me in. I don't remember at this point him arguing with me or anything like that. I just remember driving into the city and the sky being like pastel watercolors, like they would never be in real life. Just as the buildings looked really amazing and the watercolors, and it was almost like the watercolors were moving. And so, in other words, I was still high the next morning. And so my dad takes me to the hospital. I later found, had him sign some kind of papers that they were taking over for about the next week or so. and that my parents weren't allowed to interfere. Like he was turning over all authority for them to do whatever they had to do, basically. So I remember at one point, I think I got aggravated because I'm like, why am I here? What are you doing to me? When can I get out of here? What's going on? And nobody's really telling me anything much that I can
Mm.
recall. And so I think I got a little violent, let me out of here kind of thing. And the next thing I know, I'm strapped down to, I guess you call it a gurney. My right wrist and
Mm.
my left ankle are in like straps. And I see this doctor come in with a vial and he shoots me up with something to calm me down. And I found out later that the doctor that was in charge of me, this must have been the second day I was in that hospital, but the doctor that was in charge left to go on vacation. The doctor that took over didn't know that I was acting the way I was. I didn't read the report. I don't know what happened. Maybe I got violent and they just said, do this to calm him down. And
Mm.
so he was adding drugs on top of drugs. And then I got really bad. And the next thing I know, I wake up in another hospital, which is it's like a ward especially for teens who are on drugs, is basically what it was, a
Mm.
specialty type of place. And I don't know where I am. It didn't come back to me till later, the memory of the first hospital, but I didn't know where I was. I didn't know why I was there. Nobody was familiar. None of the old doctors, not a single familiar face. My parents couldn't come see me. So I wake up in this strange place and I was about, I would say, maybe 5 stories in the air. It was like a ward with rooms and then a shared common area, like a living room with a pool table and ping pong, that kind of thing. And I remember looking out the window and seeing a graveyard down there. And I'm thinking, did World War III happen? I'm in a place I
Mm.
don't recognize any of the buildings outside. I see a graveyard down there. Nobody's familiar. And the workers, I don't know what was up with them, but like I would ask them, where am I? What's going on? Why am I here? And I distinctly remember the answer, when you can figure that out, then then you will be ready to discuss where we go from here. In other words, they thought that I had taken the drug. You know what I mean? In other words, when you come clean,
Mm.
then we'll be ready to discuss whatever. So
Right.
instead of that, they were adding another layer of confusion in my mind.
Mm.
Nothing makes sense. I don't know where I'm thinking it is. World War III really did happen because it's the only way I can explain. There's not a single person I recognize, and I'm somewhere that I've never seen before, and there's a graveyard down.
Mm.
So my 16-year-old mind, that's what was happening. And so I
Mm.
started to get paranoid at that point. I started not trusting anybody because nobody's being straight with me. So then you go into this thing like, why is that? And your brain just takes over, tries to figure out a reason. I start going into this paranoia, which is also drug induced, so it's amplified. And I get to the point where I'm actually starting to have trouble finishing a whole sentence. Fear has gripped me so bad at this point that I am hiding within myself and having a hard time communicating.
Mm.
And this is where the experience with evil really comes in, this part of it. I don't know how many days I had been in this ward at this point. I'm guessing this is the second place now. I'm guessing like 2 or 3 days in. I'm basically asleep in my room. And I have this nightmare that to this day I can remember better than any dream I've ever had in my life. This is decades later. I can still visually see that nightmare and the whole experience of it, not just see it, but I remember the experience of it really clearly. And in this dream, I am standing alone in a desert, white sand, blue sky. Yeah, I still remember I could sense the breeze, like the wind blowing the sand, like whipping the sand a little bit. I'm there all alone in this desert. And then all of a sudden, there's this wall of people in front of me, like as far as I can see to the right and left, all just in one row with their arms over each other's shoulders. And I'm looking at them, they're looking at me, and then they start moving back like one step at a time. They're moving away from me. And I can't describe to you now what that terror was like because this was, I think, like my paranoia being amplified through the dream. where I
Mm-hmm.
can't, nobody wants me. The entire world is in agreement that they don't want me and they're moving away, leaving me alone forever. That was the sense. You are alone forever. Nobody wants you. And this is it. And so as they're stepping back, this is where I woke up, like right in the middle of that. And the terror was so bad. I still remember I woke up, the bed was soaked. I was sweating from head to toe. The
Mm-hmm.
sheets were drenched. And so I was in this state of terror. And these rooms were like shoebox shaped. So my bed's here, there's a
Mm-hmm.
little dresser here, and there's a door over there in the corner. And the door's closed, but you can see like a line of light coming down where the hinges meet the door, that side of the door, because the common room's beyond it and the lights are on out there. But
Right.
I remember this is this strip of light. That was it. But other than that, the room was as pitch dark as you could imagine. Just
Mm.
and in that corner where the door was, I sensed this evil being like a
Mm.
demon. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. And I could also feel its intent toward me. And the only way I can describe it is it wanted to rip me to shreds. And if it could do that 1,000 times, it would not have satisfied the seething hatred that it had for me. I could feel the energy of the hatred coming off this thing. And
Mm.
in my desperation, now I wasn't a religious kid. I grew up in a Catholic school. I believed there was a God. I believed there was someone named Jesus, but I just knew the story. It didn't mean much to me. It didn't connect.
Mm.
I didn't have any personal sense of salvation and God or anything like that. But in my desperation, this is like the Catholic tradition. You say memorized prayers. At that point in my life, that's all I knew. So in
Mm.
that moment of stark terror, I just remember just starting to say the Our Father. And I didn't even get the word Father out. I start to say it, and this demon or whatever it was just gets blown out of the room like a lightning strike. There's nothing visual, there was nothing audible, but I just felt that thing get blown out of the room like in a fraction of a second. Like as soon as I reached out, that answer was there, that deliverance was there. And it was
Mhm.
astounding because all of a sudden,
Mm.
all the fear was gone. It was just a sense of calm. And so the thing I never forgot is that as intimidating and terrifying as evil can seem, that good is infinitely more powerful. And the power of God is infinitely greater than the power of Satan or whatever you want to call the power of evil. And
Yes.
the only way I can describe it is if you had a dropper, like a water dropper, and you dropped it in the ocean, the drop coming down is the power of evil, and the ocean is the power of God. And so it's not like I got religious from that point in any way. You would think that'd be some huge turning point. The only turning point it was is from that point on, I had no doubt as to where the power was. A couple of days later, I guess the clock's up and my parents are allowed to see me. And I told my mother, I said, you have to get me out of here. I'm getting worse. If you don't get me out of here, I don't know what's going to happen. She believed me. My dad didn't. And my dad's thinking, no, we got to keep him here. And my mom won that argument. And he said, okay, I'll let you go home, but you have to agree to see a psychiatrist once a week until we figure out what the heck's going on here.
Mm.
So I'm doing
Mhm.
that. And I think it was like maybe the second session, the second weekend. So now I'm thinking it's early September by now. It was in the fall. So it must have been more than a couple sessions. So it's early September. Everybody's back at school. I asked the psychiatrist, so when do you think I can go back to school? And he said, maybe in a year. Maybe in a year. If you do well, maybe in a year. And in my
Mm.
16-year-old mind, I'm like, no effing way. Am I waiting a year? And so I just decided right there, I don't care how hard it is, I'm going back. And I convinced my parents to let me go back.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
they went in and talked to the teacher. My dad, I think, went in and talked to the teachers. I remember actually being there for one of those conversations. And the truth is, I wasn't ready to go back. I was still paranoid. I learned later, I recovered in the spring of that school year, is when I finally recovered. It took about
Wow.
9 months from start to finish. And
Wow.
after I was recovered, just through the gradual socialization, I'm sure my parents' prayers and my own prayers, but I gradually recovered. And when I did, my friends finally said to me, "We had a name for you when you were going through this." And I said, "What was it?" And they said, "Zombie." And I said,
Mm,
"Why?" And they said, "Because people would talk to you in the hall and you wouldn't even hear them. You wouldn't acknowledge them. It was like you were just a walking zombie." And they were right because I was so walled off with fear. I literally was not hearing people. I was so enclosed in myself. And my teachers just had mercy on me. They were giving me passing grades, even though I didn't deserve it, because they knew I was trying and they knew the
mm,
backstory. And it was just a very painfully slow recovery, during which time I was reaching out to God. My mother
mm.
used to watch this show. I don't know if you ever heard of it, the 700 Club. And there was it always it's like an evangelical show with just stories about God stories. And there'd always
Mm,
be like a give your heart to Christ kind of moment in that thing. And I remember every time I watched it, I'd say that prayer because I was desperate, but I think gradually my faith did build. And I think that was part of the healing process for me.
mm,
But yeah, I came out of it. And so I never forgot that encounter with evil. And it was like a life lesson that evil is real. It does exist. It's arrayed against us, but there's also good in the world, and we have to choose which power we're going to align ourselves with. And again, the power of good is infinitely stronger, but so many people in this world have not given themselves over to the power of good that evil tends to
mm.
thrive. And so we get discouraged and think it's more powerful than it is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I appreciate the story, and there's a few questions emerging from that, but I do agree with you around the dichotomy of good and evil, and it's something I've explored recently too, just through personal experiences, but I wrote an essay on it. One of the fundamental realizations I came to through that process for me was evil needs good to exist. Otherwise, it couldn't exist on its own, which in a way is interesting to think about. But for me, it just gives me more agency that I have a choice then,
Yeah.
and I could still choose good. And that just incentivizes that choice even more. And a lot of people, to your point, lose hope in the face of evil.
Right.
And it can shatter their worldview or their beliefs too, that, hey, if something like this exists, how do we overcome it? But as you shared from your personal story, if you look at good as this encompassing ocean, it can absorb the evil in the world, if not more. Yeah,
Interesting.
I really like that. And in terms of that experience, to go through something like that at such a young age, looking back as you can appreciate, how did you fully come out of it and how did you make sense of it, including knowing that it started off like this? You can make the case that it was an innocent prank, perhaps from your friends, but it became this big
Hmm.
ordeal and it could have easily taken you off in a different direction had you not had that encounter that one
Oh,
night.
yeah.
So how have you been able to make sense of it all?
Yeah.
And where is your empathy and compassion when looking back at that situation?
Yeah, scripture says that all things work together for good for those who love God and are called according to his purpose. And that would be an extreme example of that because it looked utterly hopeless. And you when trials go on and on for months, especially when you're that age, it seems like years. And
Mhm,
I was on a path where I really had prior to that, I was on a path where I didn't really know. You hear people say, you got to learn who you are, you got to know who you are. I didn't know who I was, I didn't know what I believed. I was confused and I was searching, but I was on a path toward destruction, I'm convinced. And so this actually, in hindsight, gave me the jolt that I actually needed to wake up from that
mm,
and to stop caring so much about what other people thought of me, because when you're that
mm,
age, I think it's an adult decision people have to come to stop being defined by others. But you can be
mhm,
pretty old before you get that realization. I got it at 16 because everybody
Right.
abandoned me that I cared about except my
Mhm.
parents and my sister
Mm.
and my other relatives, but I don't think they knew much about what was going on. So I was pretty much alone. I had to let go of caring what they thought about me. I'm in school, gradually recovering. I I used to get A's and B's without trying. And now I can't even get a C without knocking myself out. So it was humbling. And it was like letting go of expectations of others and even to a sense of yourself. Just, it was humbling. But I
Mhm.
had to decide that I had to get to a point where I really didn't care what people thought of me anymore. I had to just completely let that go. And that was the healthiest thing that ever happened to me because that
Mm.
set me up to be able to take risks in life and to be able to stand for something without the fear of rejection. Not that there's no fear, but it's not much of a fear compared to what it was then. And it's like I'm much
Mm.
more willing to pay the price for if somebody doesn't agree with my views or whatever. It's not going to bother me a whole lot. I care about what they
Right.
think, but it's not going to ruin my day if they think I'm
Mm.
in
Mhm.
left field or something. It doesn't really matter
Yeah.
much. In a way, it was a gift,
Right.
as you could say. So all things work together despite how impossible it may seem. That's what I learned
Mhm.
about that. And I take that going forward. I feel like I'm not in anything alone, that I can reach out
Mm.
for help. And as long as I'm being honest with God, I'm trying to cooperate with what I perceive His will for my life. I'm trying to treat people in the right way, do the right thing imperfectly, but I'm trying. And so I know He's there too. I'm not in it alone. That gives me courage. And that kind of set me up for
Yes.
life. And that's,
Yeah. No,
yeah.
I appreciate that. And I agree. Like people come to that conclusion at different points in their lives. And for you was a lot
Yeah.
earlier. I know for me it was later in life, but I think I'm still grateful for the journey. And I think that realization is so crucial and it's such a pivotal point for us in our
It is, and
lives.
we need to have like
Now,
you were saying how it affected maybe my empathy for others or my perception. I think it's really dangerous to judge anybody because we don't know what they're dealing with. We don't know their past. We don't know their ability to handle a situation. All that happened to me, and I felt like it was only God's grace. If He hadn't rescued me in that room that night, in hindsight, I think I would have gone into such a deeper paranoia that I don't think I'd have come out of it. I think I'd have been in some institution because that level of terror on top of everything I went through up to that point, I think it would have pushed me over. And the recovery was long as it is. But if that would have been added on top of it, I think it would have
mhm,
been unbearable. Yeah.
yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. So how do you now take this understanding of the nature of good and evil and apply it to what you're observing, at least from your perspective around the social collapse? What's going on from your perspective?
Yeah. Yeah. So the book, The Globalist Plan to Collapse Everything, I wrote that last year. So that experience of evil at age 16 showed me how real evil is, and that if people give themselves over to it, they're
Mm,
capable of more damage and causing more evil in the world than we can imagine because they're aligning themselves with a force that's that dark. So, in other words, I
mm,
learned how dark that force is. And so, when people align themselves with it, they can become more evil than we can understand. So we always hear about Hitler or all these other tyrants who seem to be okay with millions of people dying and just having no empathy or whatever for it. You wonder how they could be that evil. If they're aligned with that kind of
mhm,
force, they can be. So my my position, I guess you would say, is that because there is that level of evil in the world and there are people who align themselves with it, we take an enormous risk if we act as if that is not there. We are vulnerable to their schemes if we are unaware of their intent.
yes.
And it helped me overcome the normalcy bias we all have to think the future will always be like the past, everything's good, to be able to be aware of that other side of things and to be able to investigate it and not deny what I find. In other words,
Mhm,
do research, see what's going on in the world, acknowledge it, and connect the dots with other things that are happening so that you can uncover dots that are connected between different, I hate to say it this way, but different evil forces in the world. And if we're not willing to do that, again, we're going to be possibly subject to their influence. And so for people who, the way I like to explain it is we all have normalcy bias. We have this tendency not to want to go there and think things could be really off, really dangerous in some way. But the people of Germany, they were as advanced as any society in Europe. They also had normalcy bias. And it wasn't until it got really bad that they finally acknowledged what was going on. So, in other
Mhm,
words, that was
mhm,
a runaway train that went way down the tracks, way further than it would have had to if people would have had the ability to see it, admit it,
mhm,
and do something about it instead of letting it go so far before they finally did. And look at the extent of that war. Probably could have been stopped
mhm.
much sooner, but instead, tens of millions of people died.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I'm hearing from you is it's a lot of the times people are conflicted around acknowledging that evil exists. And my view is if we deny it, then we're actually feeding it even more.
Yes.
So even using that Nazi Germany example, perhaps there are a lot of people in denial that, hey, something like this can't be actually happening. And one of the other things I've learned is when you turn a blind eye to something, you're actually a lot more complicit in the crime than doing something about it just because you're not saying anything and yeah, turning a blind eye to it. So I think there's that aspect too. Now, one of the things you talk about and you shared with me too is it's it's the loss of individual freedom where I think a lot of the times it starts, right? It starts small until it propagates into something bigger. Are you able to talk about where are you seeing, like in even in today's world, where that individual freedom is being eroded in the background and not fully in our awareness?
Yeah. So in my book, The Globalist Plan to Collapse Everything, we talk about 11 collapse points. And we've seen some of this in America. It's much more in play in the UK, in Australia, in Canada, as far as the Western world goes, almost all of Western Europe. But these freedom being eroded, just for example, like in the UK, there are people who are literally going to prison for praying outside of an abortion clinic, yeah, and not even praying out loud, for praying silently. I've seen videos where the cops are questioning someone, "What are you doing?" "I'm praying." "What are you praying?" They want to know what's in your head that you're praying.
Mm,
And that people have actually gone to prison for this. This is like a total denial of personal freedom. And
mm,
even in the UK, where they're also very out there with the digital ID that's coming, and Keir Starmer saying you're going to accept it, you're going to have it for to be able to do your business transactions, to be able to conduct your life, you're basically going to have to agree to this. And to me, that's a very telling movement toward taking away people's freedoms and individual liberties and imposing a government system upon them, whether they like it or not.
mhm.
But in the book, we talk about these 11 collapse points. If you don't mind, I'll just read them quickly just to get
Yes,
through them. So the first
please.
one is national borders, and then security and police protection, which those two go together, privacy, banking and finance, education, energy, environment, medical system, food supply, and then the last two are self identity and faith. And so my
Mm,
premise is you need all 11 of these things to support a free, complex society, free and complex. And it's my contention that every one of these are being worked on to erode them, to weaken them, to bring down society so that they talk about it's 2030. You'll own nothing and you'll be happy. That's the World Economic Forum statement. It's on their website. Most people think it's just some pipe dream. They don't know why it's there. They don't think about it. But that is their plan. And in
Mm-hmm.
order for that to come to pass, I believe that they have to tear down all these systems so that they can build their new world order system on top of the ashes of that fallen society. And that's why, whether you're in Europe, whether you're in Australia, whether you're in America, almost everywhere, the borders are being flooded. That national identity is being watered down. Security and police protection are on the decrease. Certain crimes are not being punished while other crimes are being prosecuted to the full extent of the law. A lot of these migrants are allowed to commit crimes, and then the person who complains about it goes to prison. I've heard accounts where a migrant rapes a person in the UK. The person in the UK complains about it. They go to jail for defaming the migrant, and the migrant goes to jail for less time than the person who was raped. And it's just
Mm-hmm.
absurd, the level of tyranny that is starting to happen. Not every time, but the fact that it can
Mm-hmm.
happen at all, I think, is a telling sign. That combination of weakening the border, losing your national identity, and then decreasing the police protection at the same time. Like here in the States, you can steal up to $1,000 in many of what we call the blue cities, and you won't be prosecuted. You'll be out within minutes, and you can go do it again and again, up to $1,000 multiple times a day, different stores. And it's this arrangement with these George Soros backed district attorneys that have been put into place and just will not prosecute certain types of crime. And so you get that
Mm-hmm.
system together, society starts to collapse in those cities. And there's blue cities, there's blue states. It's just the attempt is being made to turn that around. But there's a lot of momentum toward that collapse on those 2 points in particular. And again, we're seeing it all over Europe and Australia as well.
Mm-hmm.
Australia has taken in, they were a population of 22 million in 2010. They have taken on 8 million refugees.
Wow.
That's out of all proportion. And of course, housing
Mm-hmm.
has gone through the roof, the cost of housing, the availability of housing. The government's
Mm-hmm.
paying to house people. So, like, landlords are kicking out some of their tenants and taking
Mm-hmm.
the government money to house migrants. And
Mm-hmm.
this is insanity. This is something
Yeah.
we've never seen in the Western world before.
Mm-hmm.
But we saw it in New York
Yeah.
City. We see it in
Yeah.
California. It's in a lot of places.
I appreciate everything you're sharing. And one of the arguments I've heard, so I do want to perhaps talk through that and get your views on it too, is a lot of these refugees or migrants are coming from war-torn countries, and war was inflicted through colonial movements or regimes. So how do you reconcile that? Because I could see an aspect of, okay, there are going to be people, there's going to be migration at times, but you have to still respect the laws and order of the place you're inhabiting. And I think that's where it's missing. But what are your thoughts around that argument that you've created this situation and now you have to deal with it in a way?
Yeah, so I think you hit it on the head. You created the situation. They call that problem, reaction, solution. So, who created the situation? The Western world created the situation with the fall of Gaddafi in Libya, and
Mhm,
then you had this flood of people into Europe,
mhm,
right? And
mhm,
then you had a similar thing in Syria, problems in Syria,
mhm,
another flood of people
mhm,
into Europe.
mhm,
Joe Biden, in his run up to the election, before he came into power, was saying, "Yeah, I
mhm,
would open up the borders. I would tell people to come on in." So it was a plan. My point is, it's a plan. These things aren't random. That the problem in Libya, my contention is they knew all along what it was going to result in, and they welcomed that. So again, this is where it gets really tough because the tendency is to say, "No way, nobody would do that. Nobody would be that stupid." They're not stupid, they're evil. And they have a long term plan, which I believe, and I know this is a lot for people maybe who maybe aren't into this kind of thing or into talking about it. But my personal belief is it is a plan to bring it all down, to establish a new world order with a one world government. That's what it really means. A one
mm,
world government, that there are no national borders. There may be countries on a map, but they will not have their own power to rule themselves. It'll all come down from the top. And we see a little bit of a foreshadowing of this in the European Union, where they have nullified elections like in Romania, right? They have nullified and said, no, your person can't come into power. We are nullifying that election. They're not allowed to be in power. And beyond that, the real decision making comes from Brussels, that individual nations don't have full autonomy. So again, it's just a foreshadowing, but that can be
Hmm.
amped up and it can go on a worldwide basis. I believe that is what they're looking for. Just the outlandishness of the statement, it's 2030, you own nothing
Mm.
and you'll be happy. Really? So that means
Mm.
somebody's going to own everything. It's not going to be you, and you're going to rent everything and somehow you're going to be happy. I don't think so. But they're
Mm.
saying it and they
Mm.
mean it. This isn't some random organization. This is the World Economic Forum. This is the
Right.
largest companies in the world that are members of this, right? And all the influential people in the world are members of the World Economic Forum, and they're stating this plan. Again, we have to get
Right.
past the normalcy bias and be willing to connect the dots.
Yeah, and I think part of what you're sharing here is that they're not making their plans. It's not a
Hmm.
secret. It's all out there to see. I think there was the Klaus Schwab book. What was it?
The
The
Great Reset.
Great Reset. Yeah. So it was
Yeah.
pretty obvious in there what is going on if you really want to learn more and choose to inform yourself. So there's a lot of that. The other thing you're touching on, and I wonder if there's an overlap, because there have been some experiments, if you want to look at it that way, but even the socialist movement, specifically, you look at Russia a century ago, you could see remnants of
Yeah.
that happening, right? Where the state eventually starts controlling
Yeah.
everything and that individual freedom is no longer there. And then anyone who speaks up against it is punished, and it incentivizes people to even, yeah, to tell on each other and really
Yeah.
snitch. So yeah, do you see any similarities in that, and do you feel that maybe some of it was being designed in the background as well?
Oh, yeah, I do. I think communism is just one model of tyranny. We tend to have this model in the Western world in the education system that it's like a right left thing. But you get tyranny on the extreme right and you get a tyranny on the extreme left. So really what it should be is there's tyranny on one side in all its various forms, communism, fascism, whatever. And then on the other side is freedom. And then maybe beyond freedom is just total chaos because there's no order, there's no law, whatever. But that's the real continuum, is freedom or tyranny. And these systems, whether it's communism, you could look toward North Korea to see what a total tyrannical form of communism would be. You can go to China to see a less tyrannical, but still pretty awful form of communism would be, where you have a social credit score tied to a digital ID, which determines your privileges, determines where you go to, where your kids can go to school, what kind of job you can have, what kind of freedom you have to travel. There's all these privileges that are tied to your social credit score, your social credit system, that they're all a part of. And so there's a highly technocratic form of communism. There's a less technocratic form that's in, say, North Korea, but those are both forms of tyranny. And I believe that we have to be really careful because this New World Order form of tyranny, I think, will be very similar to what they've done in China. I think China is like the model, that they're like a
Mhm.
testing ground for the New World Order, to try to test their plans and their technology and to see what they can get away with and then try to apply that to the rest of the world.
Mhm.
It's my personal belief.
Mhm.
But yeah, when we see things like in the big picture, when you look at, say, the Paris Climate Accords, and you look at the move on to get everybody to believe that mankind causes greenhouse gases and that greenhouse gases are harmful to the atmosphere. And then you look at other scientists who aren't beholden to government money for what they do. And there's a whole group of scientists that say that's all BS. The
Yep.
greenhouse gases are good for the environment. There was a time in the world's history where there was far more CO2 and the world was far greener, more lush. So this whole thing is all BS to try to control us. to get us to believe this story. So we give up our cars, give up our ability to travel. Everything's electric, and electric power is limited because now there's no coal
Mm,
plants, there's no major
mm,
power plants driving it. And so it's all wind and solar, and that's all the power you get. But it's on so many levels. And the book goes into this in detail, but it's too much to
mhm,
describe here. But yeah, I think it is. I think it is a plan. I think it's all a design. And
mm,
yeah, that experience again with the nature of evil enables me to at least open my mind to the evidence and see it. And that's what I've
mhm.
done in the book, is connect all those
Yep,
points.
for sure. So a few things to talk through, right? So you've talked about the whole social agenda around fear, and that's what I'm
Yeah.
hearing is the theme here around let's create fear and panic around, hey, all this energy, it's affecting the environment and it's going to have all these unintended consequences, which comes back to fear. And people in general react to emotions, and fear is obviously one of those emotions that people have a very strong reaction to. So, is that kind of, again, the design you're alluding
Oh
to
yeah.
is let's control the narrative there? Now, the other argument, and often what happens is, unfortunately, when someone like you says these things, it gets labeled under the term controversy,
Or
right?
conspiracy theory.
And
Yeah. Right.
conspiracy
Right.
theory. Yes, yes. Yeah. So how do you then navigate that? Like, in terms of how do you respond to that when it gets put under the guise of you're just being creating this conspiracy theory or you're feeding into it?
Sure. Yeah, in the book, I start with a quote from two quotes right on the inside cover on the hardback and right on page one on the paperback version of it. There's two CIA director quotes that are eye-opening. And again, if we're willing to not just set it aside with our normalcy bias, but to think, why would they say these things? I think it's very revealing, very telling. One CIA director is William Casey, and he said, "We will know our disinformation program is successful when everything the American public believes is false." And then William Colby, another CIA director, said, "The CIA owns everyone of any relevance in the major media." These are two CIA directors, maybe 2 decades apart. They're making a point. We are deceiving the public, and that's how we define the success. And we own the media, so we can control the narrative. You
Mm,
can These quotes are very easy to find on the internet, but that is the first thing in the book. It starts with that. And so what I say is, and by the way, it was after the Kennedy assassination and the CIA's desire to shut down that investigation that they coined the term conspiracy theorist and conspiracy theory. That was invented by the CIA, that phrase.
yeah.
And they've been using it to this day in the media, which
Mm,
they
mhm,
mostly control, the major media they mostly control.
mhm,
So, yeah, they've been labeling people as a conspiracy theorist ever since. So, anybody who wants to look clear eyed into the evidence, once they start talking about it, is easily labeled a conspiracy theorist. But you have to be willing to take the hit. That's my attitude. I'll take that hit.
yeah.
Can we discuss the evidence now? That's my response.
Mhm,
You believe that, but
right.
let's look at the evidence and then talk about it.
The facts don't lie,
Yeah,
essentially. Yeah. So there's an interesting point you made too, and I think a lot of the times people, and I think there's an aspect of social psychology here, in group and out group dynamics that play out. So a lot of the times you look at left and right, and it's easy to otherize in that sense. If I'm on the left or if you're on the right, it's easy to disagree and not even listen to the points you're bringing forward because of that
right,
otherization. But what I'm hearing from you, this isn't a left or right
right,
issue. This is just a general issue, and we need to look beyond the labels and the political spectrum to understand that this is a global issue that we're encountering, and it has nothing to there is an aspect of politics in
yeah.
here, but let's look beyond that and understand what this
I
is.
agree. And I would say, to your point, let's drop the left right framework and replace it with a new framework, which is globalism or not globalism, right?
Hmm.
You could say globalist or nationalist, but that word nationalist has connotations that are
Yeah.
messy. Nationalist, in its proper definition, would just be somebody who's trying to do what's best for their country. Every leader of every
Right.
country ought to be a nationalist in that sense, that they're doing their first responsibility is what's best for my country.
Mhm.
So instead of global trade agreements, we have individual trade agreements between nations, one on one trade agreements, like it used to be a long time ago. Instead of some global plan for climate change and putting taxes on carbon and all that BS that they're doing to basically is just an excuse to take money and control people and usher in their plan. Instead of that, let's do things to clean up the environment. Let's put the scrubbers on the coal plants. Let's get coal scrubbers in China. How about that? Because they're bringing a new plant online, like at least one a week on average, and it's not clean coal like it would be in the U.S. or Europe. So let's do things to do that. Let's find ways to clean up the water, right? And this whole carbon BS story that they're doing it's a big lie. It's stealing resources, and more carbon would actually help the planet. And I'm not talking about dirty carbon. I'm just talking CO2 actually would help the planet. That's what
Mm.
trees breathe in. We learned this in Science 101 in grade school.
Yes.
Mammals breathe out CO2, trees breathe it in and breathe back out oxygen. I'm using that term breathe loosely, but we
Right.
exchange CO2 for
Yes.
oxygen. The plankton, the algae, everything in the ocean does this. This is how the system is supposed to work. And yet they've brainwashed us into thinking, that it works a different way. And people are buying it.
Mhm.
And the greatest example is Al Gore and his inconvenient truth. All the premises turned out to be wrong. He
Mhm.
said it was 2006 when it came out. He said by 2016, the Arctic's going to melt. The Arctic didn't melt. There's evidence that by 2014, it was thicker. Polar bears
Mhm.
were supposed to be gone. They were thriving. This is 10 years later. There
Mhm.
was an article on this, which I quote in the book. Kilimanjaro was
Mhm.
not snow free 10 years later. Storms were not occurring more often or at higher intensities. And there's a scientific proof behind all this that it was
Mhm.
all wet. It was all fear mongering. And he's doing it to this
Mhm.
day, and they still listen to him. Unbelievable.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because I was talking to Dr. Doug Cardell. He's an economist, and he was framing it the same way that there's a natural order of things, just like our bodies, and governments come and interfere and mess up the economy in a similar way. And I
Hmm.
think that's what I'm hearing from you is that even with the environment, there's a natural order of things. We don't necessarily need to
Right.
interfere and mess things up. Now, the other thing you talked about in terms of the 11 pillars of society that are under attack from your view, you also touched on education. What's going on with education, and what are your concerns around that?
I think during the COVID crisis, many people had their eyes opened up when kids were doing remote learning and parents were seeing firsthand what some of these teachers were teaching. And the utter shock that resulted from that is something I don't think any of us can forget who paid attention to that. But it turns out that the quality of education in the Western world has been on the decline for decades and decades. And as I
Mhm.
did the research for the book, I found evidence going back. I think it was a 1980s interview with Thomas Sowell, who is a intellectual, a black man, grew up in Harlem, became very influential over time, was able to eventually, as an adult, send his daughter to a private school. And he's being interviewed on C-SPAN, and he is describing how the education he got in Harlem in the city schools back in his day was superior to the education his daughter's getting in a high priced private school. He said, we worked harder, the teachers demanded more. There was no excuse for not having your homework done. They didn't want to hear your reasons. You better be at school on time. And he said they worked us hard, they drilled us hard, and we learned a lot. We learned more than my daughter's learning. And so, what does
Mhm.
that tell you? And then we look at these test scores over time. the math capabilities in China, Japan, South Korea. They're running rings around the Western world in terms of math and science. And why is that? It's not that we're not spending enough money on it. It's we're not focused, and we've got all this
Mm.
touchy-feely education going on that isn't about the core things: reading, writing, math,
Mhm.
science, even social studies, government, learning how things work, philosophy. The classical education
Yes.
is a thing of the past unless you're lucky enough to send your kid to a high-priced public school, or if
Mhm.
you're willing to pay the price to homeschool, to
Mm.
give up one of the
Yeah.
jobs in the family and homeschool your kids. I have a lot of respect for people who take that up, because that is a daunting challenge to
Yes.
do that for your kids. But it's those are your
For
choices,
sure.
it seems, if you want to give them a real education. And it's been going downhill for decades.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think part of it, my view is with homeschooling, like if I were to put myself in that position, I would focus on also teaching real life skills, right? And one of the criticisms around education has been the whole notion of indoctrination, right? So everyone is being put into a box and it's this is how you will
Right.
behave. Whereas, as you can appreciate, we're all unique
Yeah.
individuals, not only as adults, but as children too. And that freedom to learn. I remember spending a lot of time outside as a student when I was in
Hmm.
school, and that's been taken away. Gym classes where you would go exercise, that's been taken away. So there's all these little things that are changing. And I think parents are now taking that into their own hands.
Yes.
Now, the other thing I've observed, and I want to get your thoughts on too, because I believe it's a bit of a distraction, but the focus on some of these social movements that are happening all around us and sometimes they get politicized. But what are your views where you've got all these movements popping up everywhere and then everyone has a voice? Is it really adding value or is it just a distraction from the main issues that we've touched on so far?
Can you give me an example of what you mean by everybody having a voice? Are you talking like social media? Is that what you mean mainly?
Yeah, social media is definitely a platform by which people have a voice
Hmm.
now, but I know there's a lot of controversy around even BLM that really sprang out during COVID and some of the back and forth that's taken place and the division around it too. And meanwhile, as you're touching on, there's a lot of these other larger issues that are taking place in the background and we're not necessarily paying attention to them because we're focused on some of these other issues that are springing up.
Yeah, the thing I've noticed is that it seems to me that there's a deliberate effort to pit sections of society against each other: black, white, rich, poor, Republican, Democrat, the different faiths against each other. There's always this effort to divide us and distract us, I believe. And the way you can identify it, the easiest way to identify it is the appeal being made to my mind or to my emotion. And
Mm,
most of the time, these things are going directly to the emotion, to have to make some claim on social media. This politician did this, or this person said that, and to get everybody all spun out about this, and it develops a life of its own. And then you find out a few months later, oh, it really wasn't that, it was something else. But it doesn't matter. By that time, all this emotional energy is being spent on it, and people are at each other like this. And it's just that it seems like it's that play over and over again. And when we are ruled by fear or by emotion, we can't make rational decisions. Our thinking,
mm,
and I think we can say most people experienced this during COVID. There was so much fear
yes.
there initially of this thing that we didn't understand, that it got really irrational. And the power to influence society and have society do things that didn't make sense really came into play. The thing with the masks in the restaurant, you got to wear it until you get to the table, then you can take it off. Just bizarre stuff.
Right.
The idea that masks even stop viruses, it's been proven over and over. Fauci's quoted with having 2 or 3 different positions on it. Masks don't work. You don't need to do it.
Mm,
Then all of a sudden, yeah, you should wear one mask. Well, you know what? Wear 2 masks. and even
Hmm.
wear it outside. And it's just bizarre, unscientific, but
Yeah.
yet they can push a narrative and get people to fall in line based on fear
Hmm.
or emotion. So I say, look for that pattern and step back. Just take a deep breath and try to think rationally, and then allow yourself to get drawn into that emotion that they really want you to have, because then they can control you.
Yes, absolutely. And along those lines, then, how do you keep yourself grounded in all of this? I know you've given some examples, but yeah, in terms of building your own personal resilience, I know you talk about it in your book, but how do you keep yourself grounded on a day to day basis and hold yourself accountable to continue to pursue the truth, is what I'm really hearing from you.
Yeah. For me, the most important thing is to have a faith life, to realize that there's something bigger than you that you want
Mhm.
to be a part of. And to me, that's aligning yourself with God, with his plan for the world, with his, I would say, the moral teachings of the Bible, the 10 Commandments, the teachings of Christ. Everybody has to decide what is their life anchored on, and what is their philosophy anchored on, and what are their actions going to be anchored on? Who are they accountable to? Do we believe we're accountable to a just God and will be held to account one day, or don't we? I personally do. And I don't really do what I do out of fear of that accounting that I'm going to have someday. It's more that I want to align myself with good and be a force for good in this world. And so for me, it's taking time daily to pray, to maybe read the Bible or something spiritual that is designed to draw me closer to God, to take that time, be grounded, think about what really matters in life, and be a force for good, a force for kindness, help people, help your family, do what you can to just be a force for good, and don't get sucked into these arguments that are designed to trap you and bring fear, that
Hmm.
kind of thing.
Yeah. And do you think, because of everything you and I've talked about, we obviously, it's not exhaustive in the extent of it, but there's been a lot of shift and a lot of conversations around people coming back to faith and really finding
Mhm.
that compass in their lives. What are your thoughts around that? Because there's a huge movement on that now too. I think for me, if I were to share personally, I realized that's the only thing that's real. And I lived other forms of lives where I was pursuing other things, and none of those things gave me the sense of fulfillment that having faith does. And it orients my life in the best way possible. And as we talked about at the beginning, we all come to that conclusion at some point in our lives, if we do at all.
Mhm.
But yeah, is that what you're seeing around you, or just in general based on your observation?
Yeah, I do, and I think with the younger people, you're starting to see that. We saw that with the whole Charlie Kirk movement. He
Mhm,
was very out there about his faith. I didn't realize that until after he passed away, and we started seeing
mhm,
all these videos. I didn't realize how much that was really a part of his message. He wasn't ashamed. He didn't hold back, but he was very honest with people about that. And you see this mass movement of people, younger people, coming back to a sense of faith. And I think it's a natural reaction in a way to people waking up that we've been lied to for so long. I think the whole COVID crisis and the way things didn't make sense. And that was like a wake up call, I think, that shook a lot of people up and made them question everything. And I think it's a very healthy thing to do, to be able to step away from any narrative and be able to start thinking for yourself. And I think this that helps a lot of people do that finally, maybe for the first time, is not just to buy
mhm,
the narrative that's being spoon fed to us by some
mhm,
people in power, and to think for yourself.
mhm.
And I think once that happens, now you're hungry for truth. It's, oh my God, I've been lied to. So what do I believe? What is the truth? So now you're on this journey to try to find the truth, and I think then the journey back to God and faith is just a natural outcome of that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's how you can reclaim your individual freedom that you've touched on as being eroded, and get your agency back, is where you get to decide what you want to believe in. And at the end of the day, my realization too is at the end, when mortal beings are telling you what to believe in, that's problematic because we're all going to perish one
Yeah.
day. And that's the fundamental truth as we know it too, right? Yeah. Coming full circle, we've talked about all the evil you're seeing in the world, and it's not meant to discourage people. It's really meant to reclaim our agency and pursue good because good can overcome that evil. What are some last things you would like to leave people with based on that from your own personal narrative?
Yeah. So I would say there's an expression called being black-pilled, where, for those who don't know, that's this attitude that things are hopeless. There's nothing anybody can do. Everything's corrupt. The government's corrupt. You know what I mean? We're all screwed. That's that attitude, which a lot of people have that attitude who are up on things. And I would say that attitude is not an option. And if that's where you are, snap out of it and make a personal decision that you're going to do whatever you can to make the world a better place, to do your part, to spread the truth, to be an example, to be a light. Things have looked far more hopeless in the past than maybe right now. Again, going back to the World War II era, it looked like Germany was unstoppable. They had all the technology, they had the military, they had the U-boats, the submarines before anyone else did. They had rocketry. They were causing terror all through Europe, and they certainly looked unstoppable. But, and yet we came through that. We came out the other side. So when you see a lot of bad things happening in the world, instead of getting depressed about that, do what you can. Start by praying for the people in power who need wisdom, who need guidance. Hearts can be turned. I personally don't believe that anyone is beyond hope. I think that anybody can change their mind and come around because God's capable of changing hearts. If people just reach out, the change can happen very
Mhm.
quickly. But we're called to do what we can. We're not called to solve the problems of the world. We're just called to do our part in our little corner of the world that we're in, and just take that attitude. Go on offense, is how I call it. Don't be on defense, shriveled up, waiting for the hammer to fall. Be on offense, make the world better, help somebody out, do what you can. That's the attitude that
Mhm.
changes things. And that's the attitude that gives you joy and a positive outlook on life.
Yes. Yeah, I agree 100%. And I think having hope is significant. It often reminds me of the Nietzsche quote around when you stare into the abyss is staring back into you. And you have to be aware of that, but then also, again, have hope and continue to do your part in that.
Always. Yeah.
Otherwise, yeah, it's easy to get depressed and lose hope. So thank you, Alan, for all of that. I really appreciate everything you've shared. Now, for listeners that want to learn more about your work or even find your book, I know you've shared the title, but what are some ways they can do that?
Yeah. If you go to globalcollapsebook.com, globalcollapsebook.com. There's different interviews, like the one we're having right now, that kind of draw out some additional information about the book. If you want to check those out, you can click the videos link. You also get links to buy the book on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. It's really anywhere that online books are available. Just look for The Globalist Plan to Collapse Everything. You'll find it right away. If you're in the States, if you click the what is it? Signed copies link. I can send you a signed copy for about the same price as an Amazon unsigned copy. And that's in the US just because of the international shipping costs are just too high. It's more than the cost of the book to ship it out of the US. But yeah, if you're in the US, click that. The signed copies are available in hardback, paperback, and then bundles of paperbacks 3, 6, 12, and 18 to help spread the word. And you can also read a chapter for free. There's a read link. You can click the read link and read a chapter for free. You can hear a chapter for free as well. It's also available on audiobook. I narrated it myself. So, yeah, it's globalcollapsebook.com. And then in the footer, you have the social media links. So that's like the one place to go to learn more,
Yeah.
read a chapter for free, maybe order a signed copy if you want.
Awesome. We'll put all of that in the show notes, but thank you again, Alan. Really appreciate your time today and your willingness to do this, share all your insights, everything you're seeing, including your wisdom. So really
Oh,
appreciate
it's
it.
been great. Thanks so much for having me on.